Number 16a reads, using the quadratic equation ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0, where a is not 0, derive the formula x equals to negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We are to derive the quadratic formula from the given quadratic equation. The given quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0. And they have said clearly where a is not 0, because if a is 0, then it becomes a linear equation. So how do we solve this? For us to derive this formula, we need a very strong knowledge of completing squares. Which is basically a creation of a perfect square number. When we are deriving the formula, we apply the concept of completing squares. And when you are solving any quadratic equation, the coefficient of x squared must always be 1. But if you look here, the coefficient of x squared is a. So we must make sure that the coefficient of x squared is 1. How do we do that? We simply divide all the terms by a. So we divide this term by a, we divide this term by a, and also this term by a, even 0 divided by a. We divide all the terms by a for us to make the coefficient of x squared 1 in this case. Therefore, we shall now have x squared plus b out of a, x plus c out of a equals to 0 divided by a is 0. If you divide 0 to any number, you get 0. So we have rearranged such that the coefficient of x squared is 1. We have simplified that. Now, before I do anything, let me first take away this number. C out of a is a constant, right? This is a constant. So I will take it to the other side of the equation such that I remain with x squared plus b out of a, x equals to, if I carry c out of a, it becomes negative c out of a on this side of the equation. Now, from here, what does completing square method say? Completing square method says that we get half of the coefficient of x. It says the completing square says we get half of the coefficient of x. Get half of coefficient of x. So if we look at this, what is the coefficient of x? Coefficient of x here is b out of a. What is the half of b out of a? Half of b out of a. It means we get a half of the coefficient of x, which is b out of a. This is the same as half times b out of a, and this is simply b out of 2a. So we have got the half of the coefficient of x. What does completing square also tell us? It says that we square the half, square that half. There's no I here. So the coefficient of the half of the coefficient of x is b out of 2a, and then it says that we square it. So we get b out of 2a and we square it. So this is the square of the half of the coefficient of x. I may not write every word. So we have squared the half of the coefficient of x. And then finally it says that we add the square of the half of coefficient of x on both sides of the equation. So after getting the square of the half of the coefficient of x, which is here, then we simply add it on both sides of the equation. My apologies, I have background noise a bit in the neighborhood. Apologies for that. Yeah, the noise has just come up after me starting the video. So we come back here. Remember, this was our equation. So we are supposed to add the square of the half of coefficient of x on both sides of this equation. So the equation is x squared. The equation is x squared plus b out of a x equals to negative c out of a, right? Yeah. So here what do? We now get this squared half of coefficient of x and we add it here and there. So here we shall have x squared plus bx out of a plus b out of 2a squared. This is the half I've added on this side equals to negative c out of a. I also add the same square of the half like that. And then the last rule says simplify. So we are simply going to simplify and then rearrange to meet the standard of the equation. So from here there's not much logic. Now if you look here, we have created a perfect square, which is the goal of completing squares. What is the perfect square here? The perfect square becomes, shall have x, you simply take this x here, plus, then you come and take b out of 2a squared. Remember, if we expand this, it should be able to give us the whole of this. So we are trying to factorize the whole of this expression. So it gives us x plus b out of 2a, all of them squared. And if we expand this one, it takes us back to this one that you are seeing up here. So we have created a perfect square. X plus b out of 2a squared then equals to, here we have negative c out of a plus, then you square. Since they are both in the bracket, the square applies to the numerator b and the denominator to a. Therefore here it gives us b squared out of 4a squared. If we square 2a, we get 4a squared. And then I'm keeping this side the same, x plus b out of 2a squared equals to, I want to combine these two. So what is the LCM? The LCM is 4a squared because it can be divided by the two numbers. So the LCM of a and 4a squared is 4a squared. What is 4a squared divided by a? We get 4a. 4a times negative c, we get negative 4ac. 4a squared divided by 4a squared is 1. 1 times b squared, we get b squared. So plus b squared. And then from here, we take the square root. We take the square root on this side. And also we take the square root on this side. And after taking the square root, remember this root and these two will cancel. So going to the next page, we shall have x plus b out of 2, b out of 2, 2a. Remember the square disappeared. It was taken by the root. So we shall have x plus b out of 2a equals to, and then we take the root of the whole of that number. So equals to, remember when we take the square root of any number, we get plus or minus. And then we can distribute the root since it is a fraction. So this is the same as I saw negative 4ac plus b squared out of, we had 4a squared, so out of, again, root of 4a squared. Yeah, I have distributed the root on the numerator and the denominator. Therefore, here we shall have x plus b out of 2a equals to negative plus or minus root of, and then I rearrange because in the formula that we were given, it starts with b squared minus 4ac. I have just changed the order, but the sign is for this number. The sign of a number is the sign before it, so I've carried it with a negative, and then b was positive, it is still positive here, all over, right, over, what is the square root of 4? It is 2. What is the square root of a squared? It is a. So the square root of 4a squared is 2a. Okay, the plus or minus is already catered for in this expression. Now from here, remember we are making x the subject of the formula. So our x here becomes equal to, if I take this one to the other side of the equation, if I take b out of 2a, it becomes negative b out of 2a. And then I continue, I have plus or minus there, root of b squared minus 4ac, and then this is over 2a, right? Use a straight line, please. Over 2a. Yeah, and if you look here, we have a common denominator, right, of 2a. If we have a common denominator of 2a, then the LCM is 2a, right? So the LCM here, or the common denominator, is 2a. And then on the numerator, we just keep all the numbers of the numerator because they have the same denominator. Or 2a divided by 2a, it is 1. 1 times a negative b, we get negative b. Then we keep the signs, plus or minus, square root of, and then we keep this the way it is because 2a divided by 2a is 1. 1 times the whole of that, it remains the same. Any number times 1 is that number. Any expression times 1 is that expression. Therefore, here we shall have b squared minus 4ac. And therefore, this is the formula that we asked to derive. And if we go back to it, it is here. Negative b plus or minus root of b squared minus 4ac all of them over 2a. And if you look here, this is the same thing that we have. And therefore, That is the solution to number 16a, deriving this quadratic formula from a given quadratic expression, applying the concept of completing squares. Remember, there are about 4 methods of solving quadratic equations. 1 is factorization, 2 is completing squares, 3 is the formula method, 4 is the graphical method.